Hello, I'm Jessie Gray. Welcome to Personalities. Today our guest is Dr. Pietropinto. He is co-author with Jacqueline Simenauer of Beyond the Male Myth, a nationwide survey on male sexuality. He also has a psychiatric clinic at Lutheran Medical Center in Brooklyn. Thank you for being our guest today, Dr. Pietropinto.
Thanks for having me.
It says on the cover, it's the most explosive book about male sexuality since the Kinsey Report, and I guess it is. You must have had a tremendous amount of response to this survey. You explore all areas of sexuality.
I think it's different from the Kinsey Report in that sense, too, because Kinsey was primarily interested in physical phenomena, what men were doing, how often they were doing it when they first started doing it. And this book, I was trying more to get into men's attitudes, to see where their minds were at, and to show that sexuality really goes so far beyond the physical. And
what was the most startling revelation to you in man, the cliche versus the reality?
Well, I think there were many things that were surprising to me. I think one of the things is that men indicated that they are so much interested now in pleasing women, to the degree that the whole sexual encounter can be a turnoff for them if they come away from it feeling that the woman wasn't satisfied. And that somehow now has become even more important than whatever physical gratification they get out of it.
You mean that actually the woman's gratification takes precedence over their own gratification?
That's what it would seem to be, because one of the things, for example, 98% of them said they thought it was important for a woman to have an orgasm. And about half of them actually said that they would blame themselves. They used terms like, I would feel guilty, I would feel like I had failed, that I'd been selfish, they feel terrible about it, and so forth. And about 2/3 of the men said that a sex act was over, not when they had their orgasm, but when the woman somehow expressed satisfaction. Either she had an orgasm, or she wanted to stop, or she was satisfied, or whatever.
And if she didn't have an orgasm or wasn't satisfied, that actually lessened their pleasure.
I think so, very much. And
now, on the Stanley Siegel show recently, there was someone else on, and he said that he had found out that men's pleasure was actually, they felt under such pressure to perform and to satisfy a woman that they were actually getting less pleasure themselves. Did you find that true?
I think this is true, and one of the things that's a problem, I think, is that 98% of the men said that a woman's orgasm is important, and of course it is important, but in looking at the statistics, both ours and others, we find that very few women will have orgasms 100% of the time in intercourse, and maybe 70% of our sample were able to bring their partners to orgasm half the time, a third, maybe 90% of the time. But it seems like nobody bats 1,000. And even if a woman says, you know, sometimes maybe I won't have an orgasm and it's okay, it's sometimes hard for a man to accept. And this also puts pressure on the woman somehow to perform as well. So I think you can get overly preoccupied with this. But I think the main thing that's very important is at least men seem willing to communicate. They seem to want to vary their sex practices, and they're really much more interested in making it a mutual thing, not just being satisfied.
Do you know the thing that shocked me the most was that in the survey, over 50% of the men found the most satisfying sexual relationship to be marriage with fidelity.
They said that this would be the ideal sex life for them. And,
but not the reality again.
Well, it was interesting. We said ideal sex life. We didn't say the ideal life, the most moral life, the most practical life, or something like that. We said, what would you really want? What would be the best thing for you? Because I think a lot of women feel, oh, if men really had their druthers, what they would want is a whole variety of partners. This would be the ideal for them, or a lot of extramarital activity. But I think every man really desires the one partner that's going to be faithful to him, that's going to fulfill all his desires, that's going to be the perfect sex partner. And this is still the ideal.
Was their fantasy? Was that also their reality?
Well,
how many were faithful to their wives? Were 50% faithful?
50% is just about it, right. And of husbands still with their wives that were not divorced or not separated, it was a little higher, about 67%. So, I'm sorry, 57%, so it's a little higher. But about half of them still are unfaithful from time to time. But I think the other thing that's interesting, those who are unfaithful, a lot of them really had only affairs with one or two women, not a whole variety. And these were usually brief and casual things. They weren't big love affairs. They weren't grand affairs. They were
Did they just
quick, casual, no strings attached. It was there when I grabbed it and that sort of thing.
Did they go out looking for it, or just sort of fell into their way and they
like
fell
one guy
into
said,
it?
I never think about cheating on my wife. It just happens. And this seems to be the way it works with a lot of men. Some do it as a reaction against a bad marriage. One of the prime rationales they gave was bad sex at home, or things aren't going well at home. Very rarely did it seem to be the woman herself that they were cheating with. That, you know, this was such a desirable partner, this was such a great partner. It was always either that it was quick and it was casual and I'm never going to see her again, like the traveling salesman on the road, or that they were reacting to a bad situation at home.
Well, what is then the happy young macho bachelor a myth? Is he not as happy? Does he too want marriage, or do some?
Ultimately, he wants it. Now, when we asked men about marriage, only 15% of the men who were unmarried and 15% of our youngest men said that they did not want to get married. On the other hand, when we said, if you're single now, would you rather be married? Only half of them at this point said they would rather be married. So it's kind of like heaven. Everybody wants to get there, but they're in no particular hurry to get there. But I think the young macho bachelor reaches a stage where he says, okay, enough of this. Now I'm going to look around for the nice woman.
Did you find an age at which they reached that point, or did it vary accordingly?
I would estimate, just looking at our age brackets, it probably comes in around 25, 27, I think, for men these days. And I think, the young macho bachelor that we're talking about.
The swinger.
The swinger, he's still relating to women kind of in the prostitute mode. The woman who's good for sex and not much else. And men still do relate to them on that level. And I think that's one of the things that you have to make clear. If you look at this and say, oh, men are such great guys, they're so kind, they're sensitive, they're caring. Well, that's not strictly true, because they are quite capable of relating to a woman in a very detached way, as just a body, as just a sex partner, and that's all she's good for. And they can relate to her that way, and when they do, then they're not likely to be that careful or conscientious about her satisfaction, especially because of their own uneasiness in that particular situation.
Well, now, 19% of the men who wanted marriage or preferred it or were married, whichever, said that their ideal was marriage
with some outside partner,
yeah.
a little outside activity.
Right.
And, well, for some people, this is the ideal.
Now, would those same men think the reverse, that it was good to have marriage and both partners, both the woman and the man, have outside activity? Or was this one-sided and...
It seemed to be mostly one-sided. We saw that there were very few, I think something about 5% maybe, who'd had outside affairs with the partner's knowledge and consent, and even that doesn't necessarily mean the wife was permitted the same thing. There were a few men who did say it was okay for the wife to have outside activity too.
But they still wanted to keep the wife.
A lot of them still wanted to keep the wife faithful and keep that as a male prerogative.
Were a lot of men worried that the wife would be unfaithful, or did that really enter their consciousness?
It does. No, I think it does, and some of them were really able to verbalize this. One of the things that threatened men a great deal about a woman who's had a lot of sexual experience is this idea that if she's had experience with a lot of men, maybe I won't satisfy her. Maybe she'll want to go out and find some other man. And it kind of scares them that maybe she's just going to take off and leave. And we found that a quarter of our youngest men, a quarter of our single men still wanted to marry a woman who had experience with no other man but themselves. And those who would accept sexual experience in a partner, they still predominantly wanted a woman who'd been intimate only with men she really loved and cared about. They do not accept recreational sex for women. You know, it's just, let's do it for the fun of it.
But they do for themselves, obviously, before marriage.
Yeah, because they've always been able to relate in this double mode, you know. And a man has traditionally been able to say to a woman, oh, believe me, darling, there was nothing to it. I didn't care about it. It was just simply physical. But let a woman say this, and I've seen it many times, but I was just attracted to his body. I'm never going to see him again.
Have you seen that many times?
Furious. I've seen it a couple of times, and the men just can't take this, you know. And they think this is the most terrible thing a woman can do.
So the double standard is breaking down, but it's still strongly
existent. It's still there in that
existent.
sense, yeah. I don't think the women have ever had this prostitute-Madonna dichotomy that the men have, and
do you think, did some of them, you said they wanted to have a woman who only had sexual experience with them, does the virgin still seem an ideal to the man?
I think it does, certainly to a lot of men. Now, I think, of course, one of the things is men today are much more open and tolerant about it. They realistically say, as many of them have said, well, I'm not a virgin and I can't really expect her to be. Some of them, like a comfortable shoe, wanted her a little bit broken in before they got her. But again, they didn't want this great deal of experience. And so many times we saw responses qualified with things like, can have some experience, but shouldn't be a professional, shouldn't be a whore, shouldn't be a bed hopper. Strange to use these kind of words, you know, to the average American woman these days. But this whole idea of the woman as prostitute is still very strong in men's minds.
Did they have a fantasy woman? Was there an ideal woman?
There are ideal women. I think all men have them. And
was there similarity?
Yeah, I think the main thing about these women is their concern for the man. And this, I think, is the key of any ideal woman, any dream girl. To some, it's really the devoted slave, the dream of genie fantasy, the girl who's going to do everything you want and always put the man first. Some men are more realistic about it. And I think there, again, the idea is this is the woman who's going to be my friend, who's going to cover me, who's going to be there in a crisis, who's going to understand me. And I think this is getting stronger because men are seeing women more as people these days. We're used to having them in the classrooms, not only on the college level, but on the graduate level. We're used to having them as co-workers, not just as auxiliary helpers. They're no longer just secretaries and receptionists. They can be executives. They can be even bosses now.
Did they have a fantasy, though, of, say, the woman perpetually young, 38, 24, 38?
A few did physically, but I don't think that this necessarily is the most important thing to a man's mind. I don't think they're just preoccupied with that, or that youth is always the big thing. One of the interesting things about cheating men, for example, if a man is a cheater, he'll usually cheat early. There are...
Oh, really?
Yeah. And this is where Kinsey made a big mistake in doing his survey, because he said, at the time he did a survey back in I'm forgetting when he did his survey. It was in the late 30s, I believe. And he said at that time half the men he would estimate would cheat. I'm sorry, it was 1948 he did his survey. But he said half the men would cheat at some point. And looking back at his data, I saw that men who were now 55 to 65 and would have cheated in Kinsey's, would have been surveyed in Kinsey's time, only a third of these men had ever been unfaithful. And the mistake Kinsey made was he said, well, about a quarter of them have cheated now, so give them another 30 years and that'll go to 50%, and it doesn't. The ones who start cheating cheat early and keep on cheating. So there are some men who later on in life start looking for a younger woman.
There are.
There are some. But
and without having cheated before?
Yeah. But this is not the rule. I think my feeling was, gee, there must be a lot of men who, as they get older, now suddenly want a younger woman to recapture their lost youth.
Right.
And this is where you're going to see the big bulk of your cheating going on. But it isn't where the bulk of it is. The bulk of it is the guy who's a chronic cheater, and right from the beginning he wants a variety of women.
Did men put sex over career, family, other things? Where was sex in their ranks of importance?
Probably pretty low, because when we said,
what was
how do you feel
first?
about sex? Well, first of all, only 20% of men said that sex was the most important pleasure in life. And we're talking about a pleasure now. We're not even talking about the most important goal in life or the most important thing in life or the most important pleasure. I think career probably would come first. Now, we had one fellow who was able to rank his preferences in terms of 1 was career, and 2 was food and drink, and 3 was 8 hours sleep, and 4 was a good sex life. And sometimes people can mix up biological and psychological and sexual needs all together. But a lot of men did talk about careers being more important, about love and family relationships, things that I wouldn't really consider pleasures. But this is the way men think. You know, they want goals, they want to feel they're accomplishing something. One fellow who was an airline pilot said that flying was more important because he could spend a heck of a lot more time flying than he could in bed.
But in degree, it didn't make up for the difference.
That's
Sex.
right, yeah.
You said that men wanted a woman who was, well, as you said, the willing slave and the one who idealized him. Some men did.
But they all want a woman who's concerned about them. That's the dream girl.
What is the big turn-on for men sexually with a woman? What can a woman do? What would they like a woman to do sexually to satisfy them the most?
Again, the thing that they seem to want most is the woman who can really indicate that she's interested in sex, that she wants it, even to the point of being the aggressor in sex. I think we've been conditioned to believe that men are turned off by an aggressive woman. And it seems to be quite the contrary. The men really like the idea of a woman who can come on sexually to them and bring her own ideas in and add variety and make it exciting. Now, we have to qualify that to say that, but this woman has somehow got to convey to them, it's because I'm so turned on to you. They mustn't get the idea that tomorrow she's going to see some other guy and be just as aggressive and just as turned on.
So it can't be, as a man, as you said, the man for the woman can be, he just loves the body, and the women, they do not like it when a woman reverses
That's right.
that.
And it's funny, you hear men say, I don't want to be used in a sexual relationship. And you say, well, you know, you had your gratification, you enjoyed it too, and it didn't matter, you know. The whole thing seems to be a man is used if the woman means more to him emotionally than he means to her. Mm-hmm. This he doesn't like. So a man still wants to feel that she cares about him.
A man would not be attracted to a woman who came up at a party, just went at him because she liked his looks, and then left him the next day.
Right. And especially
would that be a turn off?
It would be a turn off if he knew that this is the way it was going to be. Or at least he would have to approach her in a very detached way himself, and I think would feel very competitive with other men. I think men are always aware of the woman who has had a lot of lovers, and how am I going to measure up, and am I going to perform as well, and this is a very inhibiting thing for them.
What about the ones who were faithful to their wives or to a partner? Did they get bored with sex? And why?
About half of them did, and half of them said no, it got better with time. And the whole key seemed to be how open the woman was to experimentation, to trying new things, to adding variety to her life, to talking about mutual fantasies. And this, of course, I guess, is the big advantage of monogamy. You can get to know your partner better. You can
But that didn't lead to boredom if variety was imposed.
Now, on the other hand, a lot of them complained and said, well, you know, my wife never liked sex that much, and my wife is too inhibited and so forth. Some of the men said they were inhibited about talking about things they would like. And there were things they would like to try, but somehow they felt too embarrassed to bring it up to their wives. But that seems to be
That's really a problem, isn't it? Just communication between two people? Does that occur
often,
or how prevalent was that?
Well, most men today said that they did talk about their preferences with their partners. The ones who did at least were the oldest men. And, all right, you can say, well, maybe this is because they've been married longer than the others, so they don't have to communicate anymore. But I don't
or
think
they just given up.
I don't think that's the reason. But it often is a problem, especially, I think, early in a relationship.
Do men enjoy just cuddling and fondling and kissing and hugging without it leading to sex?
Mm-hmm. Now, one thing, for example, first talk about when it does lead to sex. As far as a foreplay activity, the biggest turn-on for men in foreplay was good old-fashioned kissing and caressing, not the more exotic stuff. But even beyond that, when they said, you know, do you like hugging and kissing and caressing when it doesn't lead to sex? Yes, a large percentage of them, I think over half of them said that, or was probably closer to two-thirds, said yes, they did like it, and some beyond that even said it was a real need for them. One of the important things, though, I think, about that question is when you looked at it, the times men wanted to hug and kiss was when they were really feeling something. Maybe they feel a little exhilarated because they'd had a good day, or down because things were not going too well. But they had to be kind of on some level of emotional arousal. I think a lot of women expect men to be kind of sitting there neutrally, you know, content with their beer, watching a baseball game on TV, and they want to know why doesn't the husband come over and put his arms around them and start kissing and caressing them, because he isn't feeling anything emotionally at that point. So here I think a woman has got to get kind of attuned to this, that men don't do it as a routine. You know, it's not because for them it is a routine. They don't like routine demonstrations. But when they're feeling something, be it good or bad, then that's when they want this closeness.
Did men find that their attitude towards sex and perhaps women changed as they grew older?
They seem to enjoy sex more. I think as far as their attitudes toward women, yeah, that changes too, and especially I think that men are perceiving women now. There are two ways you can look at it. How much of it is due to the man's aging and maturity, and how much is it due to the fact that the women are changing these days? And most men seem to welcome the new, I hate to use the word independence in women, that we can use that word, but I think developing themselves as human beings. And they like that because it made women better companions for them. It made them more valuable to them. An intelligent woman, a psychologically astute woman is better as a partner and better as a friend. And I think men like this.
What irritated them the most?
The disinterested woman, the passive woman, the accommodating woman. And this is strange because, again, we've seen so many people talking about how if a woman is too aggressive, it's going to turn men off. And the thing that turns them off these days is if the woman seems to just kind of be going along with them and, you know, I'll do what you want to please you. Well, that's not what they want. They want the woman to be pleased, too.
Did men enjoy oral sex? Did a great many?
Most of them did, yeah. We found that about 80% overall and 90% of our youngest men were engaging in oral sex. And only about 2% of them or so said that they really disliked it but kind of did it to please the woman. The rest of them either said they really enjoyed it or at least they, you know, something that they didn't mind one way or the other and they wanted to do it. But
do men have fantasies? The way we've heard so much about women's fantasies, the rape scene, the whatever.
Men do have fantasies.
Do they fantasize during the sexual act, but not about what they're doing?
Not too often. Some of them do, but it's a minority. And most men, interestingly enough, fantasize about their current partners, including their wives. And Red Book's study, which came out recently, also documented this, that in fact even men who fantasize about group sex, the wife was often one of the partners in the group. But their fantasies are not as involved as women's. You don't get into these beautiful, elaborate scenarios that you'll find in Nancy Friday's Secret Garden like that. Men are much more interested in sexual release. Now, a woman will often use a fantasy to get to a state of arousal. The man is usually aroused when he starts the fantasy, and then is using it to kind of get quickly to a climax with it. So,
do any men have to fantasize to prolong, to keep from coming to climax too quickly? Do they have to start thinking about how to fix the car the next day?
I don't know. We didn't really get into that. I don't know if you'd call that a fantasy, really. That sounds terribly unimaginative. Yeah, that's a non-fantasy, I suppose. I guess some men do. We found that 4 out of 5 men said that they did try to prolong their orgasm. So I guess that to some extent there's some kind of a conscious effort going on to.
How did men feel about having sex with older women?
Actually, only about 1 out of 6 said that the woman had to be younger or his age and would not consider an older woman for a partner. So most men today are quite open to the idea of an older woman as a partner. I think this is logical in the sense that today there are very few men, I suppose, who say, well, I'm going to have one sex partner. This will be the girl I'm going to marry, and that's going to be it. Well,
you mean even if they expect to have it, they're going to have plenty beforehand?
I think that they are more open to variety. A man usually does not enter his sexual activity saying, well, I'm going to look for one girl, and that's going to be it. So now, since they're open to more of a variety of partners, they're open to older women as well. And
do you think that's on the increase, their acceptance of the older woman?
Oh, I think, sure. I think it's definitely on the increase. And I think a lot of women are needlessly concerned with this idea of hiding their age. A lot of women automatically knock about 5 years off their age or more because they say, oh, if he knows how old I am, he's going to get turned off to me. I think on the contrary, and the other thing, of course, is that men really like sincerity in a woman and so forth. And if the relationship's going to move to a more serious level, I think it's a bad start to say, by the way, I lied about my age, and better off being open about it.
Why do you think they are more accepting today, though, than, say, they would have been 25 years ago?
Well, I think...
And still there's a lot of prejudice against it.
I think part of it was, first of all, the idea that you were going to pick one woman. So you immediately start trying to narrow it down to various categories. She's got to be younger, she's got to be slim, she's got to be want children or whatever. But I think one other reason is because one of the biggest things that men have been afraid of, I think in other people's eyes as well, is that people are going to say, oh, he's looking for a mother. He's looking for a mother figure, even if the woman isn't that much older than himself. Today, I don't think men are as sensitive about that. I don't think they're so uptight about saying, I have some needs too. It's not so bad anymore that a man's got to be in charge. He's got to be the big daddy. He's got to be the boss.
So actually, both men and women are becoming more total people.
Yeah, and I don't think
separate entities than they were.
Yeah, a young man doesn't worry about, gee, does this woman have more experience than I do? He may even welcome it and say, hey, maybe she'll be a better bed partner for it. Well, some of the guys said, maybe she can teach me a thing or two. And they're much more open about this. They don't feel that they have to be in charge anymore, that they have to be the leader, they have to be the teacher.
And they all want love. That is predominant.
They want love and they want sex, and hopefully they'll get it together at some point.
You know, I also watched you on the Donahue show, and you mentioned once, I don't know if I can quite remember exactly what you said, but it was something to the gist of, you think that men perhaps want too much for a woman today, and that too many pressures are put on women to perform, to be all things?
I think that's happening. I think that men are relying on women to do more and more for them. And in some ways, this is a welcome thing. They want her to share in major decisions. But on the other hand, they haven't really freed her from a lot of the older roles. And okay, sure, men sometimes do help a little more with the housekeeping. They help a little more with childcare, but I don't think it's anywhere near 50-50 in any relationship.
Neither do I.
And that is a tough thing. I think it's tough that, again, that they're looking to them more and more to be validators for them, and they don't have as many men friends as before. I think people go out to the suburbs and watch television rather than going down bowling with the boys or drinking at the corner tavern. And again, this is a good thing, but it's a bad thing if all, the wife is expected to fill all the needs and make them feel like they're important and make them feel like they're good lovers and take care of them and everything else. And the other thing, while I saw plenty in the book about men wanting to share and feeling that there should be sharing and communication, I didn't see one single response that said, I would like a woman that I could take care of, that I want to be the nurturer. And that's, I think, still a problem, that men are not as nurturing as they could be at times, and maybe are too much on the taking end.
But they did want to be nurtured.
Oh, I think they did. And even when we asked them what kind of a woman would you look for in a long-term partner, the answer they picked most was a woman who had concern for my needs, which is interesting because a lot of psychologists would have us believe that men won't even admit this to themselves, let alone admit it on a survey.
Do you know our time is up? Thank you very much for being our guest.
Thank
and
you.
we didn't get into your new book on poetry therapy, which is coming out soon, but we'll look forward to it. We've been talking to Dr. Pietropinto, co-author of Beyond the Male Myth. I'm Jessie Gray. Have a good week.